No one ever taught Ethan how to be afraid. Fear arrived quietly in his life the way cold enters a room. Not suddenly, but slowly enough that you didn't notice until your fingers were already numb. At first, he thought fear was just one of those things kids grew out of, like believing monsters lived under the bed or thinking shadows moved by themselves at night. But Ethan was wrong. Fear didn't leave. It stayed. It learned the shape of his home. Every evening at exactly 6:12 p.m., the front door opened. Not 6:10, not 6:15, 6:12. Ethan didn't check the clock. His body did. The moment the door handle clicked, something inside his chest tightened like a string pulled too far. He would freeze wherever he was. In his room, on the floor with homework, standing in the kitchen with water halfway to his lips. And then, Ethan. His name didn't arrive warm. It arrived sharp, like a key scraping the inside of a lock. David Parker didn't yell. He didn't have to. That made him scarier. His voice lived at one level, low, clean, controlled, like someone speaking through glass. Ethan came into the living room and stood where he was always supposed to stand, near the coffee table, close enough to be seen, far enough not to lean in anywhere, hands folded behind his back. David sat in the same chair every night. Straight posture, papers on the table, work boots set neatly by the door. His eyes would scan Ethan the way a teacher reviews a test. Shoes? Aligned. Shirt? Tucked. Back? Straight. Then came the questions. How was school? Did you finish your assignments? Did you speak in class? Did you interrupt? Did you waste time? Did you disappoint your teachers? Ethan answered yes or no. Too long meant explaining. Explaining meant risk. David believed questions were training. He called it discipline. Lisa called it pressure. And Ethan didn't call it anything. You only name storms after you survive them. Lisa Parker watched this nightly ritual from the doorway between the kitchen and the hall. She never interrupted. At least not anymore. She had once, early on, when Ethan was smaller, when his hands shook too easily, when he cried in his sleep. She had told David he was too hard. David had replied calmly, like a man explaining gravity. The world will be worse. After that, she spoke less. Not because she agreed, because every protest made David colder, and cold was worse than anger. Ethan went to bed early every night. David liked order. Order liked silence, and the house learned how to hold its breath. Ethan learned how to walk quietly, how to eat quietly, how to exist in a way that didn't take up air. At school, they called him polite. Teachers liked him. He never talked back, never disrupted, never laughed too loud, never asked dumb questions, never caused trouble. They thought he was perfect. Perfect kids don't get noticed, and unnoticed kids are safe. When other boys talked about their parents yelling, arguing, slamming doors, Ethan listened quietly, wishing his father would yell, because yelling faded. Silence stayed. One afternoon in science class, Mrs. Howard asked a question. What happens when pressure builds but has nowhere to go? Hands went up. Ethan's did not. He stared at his desk the way he stared at his father. Carefully, Pressure without release, Mrs. Howard said, always finds another way out. Ethan wrote that sentence down. He didn't know why, but something about it felt like a warning. That night, David noticed. Ethan had folded his jacket wrong. Not messy, not sloppy, wrong. David didn't raise his voice. He raised his eyebrow. You don't listen carefully enough. Ethan whispered, I will. That word, will, was dangerous. David folded the jacket himself, slowly, deliberately, without looking at Ethan. When something is done wrong, he said flatly, it reflects who you are becoming. Ethan stood very still. David stood up. Not suddenly, but with weight. All failure begins with carelessness. He passed Ethan without touching him. And somehow, that was worse. Lisa waited until David had showered before knocking on Ethan's door. Can I come in? Ethan nodded. She sat on his bed, the only place in the house where voices were allowed to be soft. You're doing your best, she whispered. Ethan didn't answer, because he didn't know if it was true. He stared at his wall. He thought about Mrs. Howard's words. Pressure always finds another way out. He wondered, where did fear go when it wasn't allowed to breathe? And then, something changed. Not at home. At school. Lucas Reed transferred mid-semester. New kid. Loud laugh. Uneven haircut. Didn't sit straight. Didn't whisper. Didn't apologize for taking up space. And for reasons Ethan couldn't explain, Lucas annoyed everyone and fascinated him. Lucas wasn't afraid. Or if he was, he wore it like he didn't care. One day at lunch, when Lucas dropped his tray and cursed under his breath, the table erupted in laughter. Ethan didn't. But Lucas caught his eye and grinned. That grin wasn't cruel. It was daring. Ethan felt something twist. Not fear. Curiosity. Lucas slid into the empty seat beside him. You always this quiet? Ethan nodded. Lucas didn't mock him. Didn't tease him. He just nodded back. Huh. Must be peaceful. Ethan had never heard silence described like that before. Peaceful. That afternoon, Lucas waited for him after school. So, you walking home? Yes. Cool. Mind if I walk too? I don't know where anything is yet. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. They walked, not talking much. But Lucas was somehow loud without sound. He kicked rocks, whistled, stared at clouds, named shapes. Ethan listened, feeling something unfamiliar. Not danger, not calculation, just... It started with small changes, barely noticeable, but real. Ethan laughed once in science class, quietly, under his breath. But the sound surprised him. It escaped without asking permission. Lucas noticed, raised an eyebrow. "Whoa," he whispered. "He speaks." Ethan almost smiled. Almost. Lunch became less silent. Not noisy, just less empty. Lucas talked about his old school, his late homework, his absent dad, his mom who worked nights. "How do you deal with parents?" Lucas asked once. Ethan froze. Lucas added quickly, "Not mine, just in general." Ethan thought, then said something he had never said out loud. "I try not to be a reason for them to be disappointed." Lucas blinked, then frowned. "Man, that's heavy." Ethan shrugged. Lucas shook his head. "No, that's unfair." Ethan looked up, confused. "Parents are supposed to mess up, not you." That sentence stayed. It echoed, louder than David's voice. One afternoon, Lucas came over. Ethan hadn't planned it. It just happened. Lucas walked home with him and kept walking. Inside the living room, Lucas sat awkwardly, looked around, noticed too much. The silence, the order, the cold neatness. David hadn't come home yet. Lucas whispered, "Does your house blink?" Ethan frowned. "You mean what?" "It feels like it's watching." Ethan didn't laugh, because it was true. They were in Ethan's room when the door opened. 6:12. Ethan felt the air vanish, heart and throat. Lucas noticed immediately. David's voice carried down the hall. "Ethan?" Lucas stood. "Is that your dad?" David entered, paused. Eyes flicked to Lucas, then back to Ethan. Cold calculus behind them. "Who is this?" Lucas extended his hand. "Lucas, sir." David did not shake it. The air froze. Ethan stood straighter. This wasn't disgust. Lucas shifted uncomfortably. David's voice didn't rise. It dropped. "I expect communication." Ethan whispered, "I'm sorry. Your apology is premature." Lucas swallowed. "I can go." David didn't look at him. "Good." Lucas didn't argue. As he passed Ethan, he whispered, "Whoa." Not in awe, in warning. Ethan didn't see Lucas again for 3 days. Not at school. Not at lunch. Not after class. And that scared him more than his father ever had. On the 4th day, Lucas showed up with a bruised look. Not on his face, in his posture, like something had bent him. "Sorry," Lucas said quietly. "My mom works double shifts this week. No phone, no friends allowed." Ethan nodded, relieved, but shaken. At home that night, David didn't speak during dinner. Silence meant evaluation. Later, when Lisa knocked, Ethan whispered, "He hates Lucas." Lisa sighed. "He doesn't hate him. Then why?" She sat beside him. "Because Lucas feels uncontrollable." Ethan frowned. "What's wrong with that?" Lisa looked at her son. Really looked. And for a second, she didn't sound tired. She sounded afraid. When someone has lived their whole life believing control equals safety, anything unpredictable feels like danger. Ethan didn't understand. Not fully, but he felt something crack. One night, David waited longer before speaking. Ethan stood in position. David watched him, and then said, "You are changing." Not loud, not angry, just certain. Ethan didn't answer. David continued, "Be careful who teaches you how to think." That wasn't concern. It was a threat wrapped in wisdom. Ethan lay in bed that night, staring at the dark. Fear had moved. It wasn't in David anymore. It was inside him, whispering, "If I change, will I disappear?" Pressure always finds another way out. Mrs. Howard's words came back. And suddenly, Ethan realized something terrifying. Fear had stopped teaching him how to behave. It had started teaching him how to survive. The breaking point never arrives loudly. It arrives when something finally says, "No more." Ethan stopped answering every question perfectly, stopped correcting his posture every 5 minutes, stopped folding clothes with fear built into his fingers. Nothing dramatic. Just small failures, small rebellions, small breaths. David noticed immediately. Not rage, calculation. "You're slouching again." Ethan straightened. "You are careless." Ethan said nothing. "You are growing undisciplined." Ethan whispered, "I'm just tired." The word tired was forbidden. David stood. "I worked 12 hours today." Ethan nodded, silent. David leaned forward. "And you are tired?" Something unfamiliar stirred in Ethan. Not courage, not anger, just truth. "I'm tired of being scared." David froze, not outwardly, but emotionally, like ice cracking inside him. He laughed once, dry. "Fear is useful." Ethan swallowed. "It shouldn't be home." David stared at him, long, hard, like looking at a stranger. "Fear teaches accountability." Ethan shook his head. "Fear teaches hiding." The room swallowed sound. Even Lisa seemed to disappear. David's eyes reflected something old. Not cruelty. Damage. "You think I'm too much?" Ethan nodded. David sat down slowly. "He was worse." Silence. Then, "He didn't teach. He corrected." Ethan's breath caught. David's voice lowered. "He never needed to raise his hand. He convinced me I had no right to fail." Lisa whispered, "David?" David closed his eyes. "And now you tell me fear doesn't belong in a home?" His voice cracked, just a little. Ethan whispered, "I think love does more." David looked at his son like he was 13 again. Not a father, a boy, trying not to fail. David stood and walked out. Not angrily, not dramatically, just gone. He didn't come home that night. Ethan lay in bed shaking. Not from fear, from exposure. He had opened something and didn't know what would come out. David came home near dawn, hair undone, eyes heavy. He didn't speak. He went to bed. Lisa cried in the kitchen, quietly. Days passed. Not cold, not warm,
uncertain. Fear had nowhere to sit. Lucas noticed. "You okay, man?" Ethan shrugged. "I think my dad—" He stopped. Lucas waited. Ethan swallowed. "Is afraid too." Lucas nodded. That tracks. That weekend, David did something unheard of. He knocked on Ethan's door. "I want to take a walk." Ethan followed. They walked far, to the empty baseball field. David stared at the ground. "You were right," he said finally. "Fear taught me performance, not peace." Ethan didn't interrupt. David continued, "And I gave you my childhood, instead of giving you yours." Ethan didn't cry. He inhaled. For the first time in his life, the air didn't hurt. Nothing changes overnight. Even truth has to stretch. David didn't become soft. He became honest. He asked questions, listened to answers, stopped inspecting silence, and started asking meaning. Ethan didn't become loud. He became visible. He laughed sometimes. He asked questions. He defended himself, not angrily, quietly, like someone learning to walk again. Lucas didn't leave. Lisa smiled more. The house exhaled. David stumbled. Sometimes. Fear whispered, but it no longer commanded. One night, Ethan caught his father staring at the wall. "What are you thinking?" David replied honestly, "I'm unlearning." Ethan smiled. "That's harder than learning." David nodded, "But better." And that night, nothing terrible happened, nothing magical, just peace, which for them was miraculous. Fear had once ruled their house, but love had learned how to enter softly, without permission, and stayed.